What's up, everybody? Joshua Yale here to talk about a show that's coming to Netflix soon called Locke and Key that I'm very excited for. We've actually seen some of the show, and we're going to talk about our impressions. We want to let you know why you should watch it. Joining me is Terry Schwartz.
Hello.
And Corrado Corretto.
Hi.
First, I just want to let everybody know at home, we are going to keep this spoiler-free. These are just our general impressions of the show. I want to let you know about it because it's actually something that's been around for a while, an acclaimed comic book. It has had a bit of a troubled production history getting to the screen, but it's here now. It's coming to Netflix in February. And first, we just want to start with just a quick, quick pitch on why do you think people should watch this show, Terry?
So I was so excited to watch this that when Netflix provided all 10 episodes, I binged them over the holiday as quickly as possible and was very excited to come back and talk with everyone around it. So I'm glad we can talk with everyone at home about why we're excited too. I describe this show as taking some of the horror elements of Haunting of Hill House with kind of the vibe and tone of Netflix's Lost in Space, mixed a little bit with Stranger Things and Harry Potter into a very engaging mystery, a spooky mystery of a show that kept me guessing as someone who has not read all the comics. I know I'm in the minority because both of you have, that I thought was really compelling and definitely think that for like the genre lover out there who's missing like the Altered Carbons, the Umbrella Academies, the Lost in Space was just on, but those types of shows on Netflix, this is totally going to scratch that itch for you.
I agree, absolutely. It definitely does have like a Haunting of Hill House vibe mixed in with a little Harry Potter. But the biggest thing that I love about this show is specifically how unique and creative it is. The comic book, when I was reading it, blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like it. I'm sure we'll get into a minute why it was so creative. But like they use these keys to open up doors, and each key has a different power, and it takes you places that not only do you not see coming, but I'd never seen before. I'd never seen anything like that in a book or anything like that. So I was blown away by like the use of magic and also by like sort of the dark horror elements of the comic and kind of the way it was translated into the show.
So you've read the entire comic series, and how much of the show have you gotten through?
I'm halfway through the show. I'm around episode 5.
Okay. So Terry's watched the whole thing, half the show. I've watched only the pilot. So you're actually getting a different perspective of people who've watched different amounts of it. As far as the comic book, I'm just like you. I'm a huge fan of the comic book. Read it as it was coming out, issue by issue. And it's actually I've read a lot of comic books. Probably my favorite comic book ever. So I was very skeptical of like, I don't know if this show's gonna do it, but I actually thought it's does such a good job just having watched the first episode. But yeah, it is, as you guys have said, like it's this like really cool, creepy, magical mystery exploring kind of like this old like haunted house in a way with discovering wondrous new keys, each with its own like rule and ability, and just it all builds like this deeper lore that's very unique and it's very modern and American, which was, I know a lot of things you're like, in any like, show or movie, when they find some like ancient relic or magical object, it's always like, oh yes, this is from ancient Egypt. Like, no. This is like actually a very cool thing. It was actually created by Joe Hill and Gabe Rodriguez. Stephen King's son. And yeah, he just came up with this mythology and told this story. This is tragic story about the Locke family. And for those who actually don't know what it is, let me give you a quick synopsis. It's a tragedy befalls the Locke family, and mom and 3 kids go back to their ancestral home in Massachusetts. It's kind of like in the middle of nowhere. And yeah, they go home to this old house, Key House. And they quickly start discovering like these oddities in the house because of these keys that sometimes you can like unlock a door and it'll like take you someplace, or you'll turn it and it'll give you like a power or something like that. But at the same time, there is an evil creature on the grounds of the house who knows all about the keys and all the mysteries, and wants to use them for nefarious ends. And so that's the show.
What I will say about the show, though, because I watched the first 2 episodes, had to wait a little bit for the other 8, immediately devoured the first volume of the comic. So I came at it kind of the opposite, where I had this context from the show and then discovered a lot of things from that first volume and then proceeded to watch the next 8 episodes. It's not the same, but I think that's a strength. Like it draws on a lot of key elements from the comic that, my husband has read all the comics as well, so I kind of could bounce off with him his experience reading the comics and what was different and what was the same. So like it does things a little bit differently. It gets to familiar points in a different path. But I think that's really important because that keeps it surprising as someone who has, maybe like Joshua or Corrado, consumed all of it or who's coming to it for the first time. And so that's why we're being really delicate about like what's a spoiler and what's not. Obviously, we don't want to give anything away now, but like to me, that was like a big strength for the show, all the way up to the end, which you guys haven't gotten to. But I do think it's important to talk about the tone because that's one thing you both brought up is that like this isn't super like the edgy, like dark, super scary horror version that the comic is. To me, it's a bit more whimsical. We keep going back to Harry Potter as a comparison, but I think it really does work for what I would describe as like the charm of the show. I wouldn't call this a scary show. I would call it more a family show that you could watch like
This Is Us.
I know.
This Is Us with magic.
But like I think it works in a really like Altered Carbon is like the bloody sci-fi show, right? Lost in Space is a sci-fi show that is really engaging, but you can watch with your family. This is edgier than Lost in Space, but I also think it's the type of show that you can watch with like family a little bit.
But
more.
it's almost kind of like it is to Hill House, right? What Lost in Space like would be to Altered Carbon.
Right.
See, for me, like I actually had an issue with some of the tone in the show. Like I loved specifically the comic book was so dark and so eerie and actually scary at times when you're reading it. The show feels like it was shot that way. But then like some of the music choices that they bring in feel so Harry Potter that I'm like, wait a minute. Like if you took that score out from the show, I think you would have a different experience. I really do. Not to say that it takes away from the story. I still think that like it's a phenomenal story. I think that people that are fans of the comics are going to tune in and they're going to love it. But I do think that some of us who really, really like sort of grappled and sort of clung to the horror elements of the comic are gonna feel that it was a little bit neutered in the show.
I would say, a tiny bit. Yeah. It's not as intense and as bloody and as like visceral as the comic, but I think the show makes its own identity, and I don't think it takes away from it at all, at least for me, from what I've seen so far. And to Terry's point, it's a remix of the comic. It still has all the signature elements, all the keys, all the characters, the main settings.
Keys.
But they introduce new keys. They kind of like rearrange things. So even though I know the story like the back of my hand, but I was surprised in the pilot. Like I know so we weren't going to spoil or anything, but I'm saying like it starts in a way that I didn't expect, right? The way it tells me things I think I already know. It's showing me them in a different way. And so I think that's the best thing you could ask for as a big fan of the comic is that you're getting something that you love, but you're getting it told in a new way that makes it feel fresh.
And I think it keeps to the spirit of the comic ultimately is like the most important like thing that I would want people to take who might have like heard some of the stuff we're saying and be like, wait, you had me excited at first and maybe I'm not as excited because you're talking about the tone.
It's still great.
Yeah, but I think that it really does capture the spirit of Locke and Key, and I just really enjoyed the way that they presented it to in this form that's ultimately a different form than the way you consume a story through a graphic novel.
I think personally what the show does well is that maybe even in some cases like veers from the comic, but in some ways I'm not going to go as far as it does better because I really love the comic, but the family dynamic just feels like really tangible in this show. Like I said, This Is Us at Hill House. To an extent, like there is that, like you feel the brother-sister like relationship. You feel like the drama of having the tragedy that befell the family. Like it's very much present in the story.
And like in the comic, a lot of the story is told through the eyes of the three Locke kids, especially at the beginning through Bodhi, the youngest son. And I think that's where some of that like kind of like whimsy Harry Potter tone comes through in that presentation of seeing the world through his eyes and discovering Key House and its mysteries and magical tendencies through his eyes. Is this like childlike like charm to seeing him go through this, and then something horrible happens and you're like, oh well, you're a kid. How do you try to cope with that? And again, you're seeing it through the eyes. And I think that's where like even if it is a little bit sanded down, some of that edginess and some of that horror, I think it totally just keeps in like the really interesting mystery and storytelling.
Yeah. I will say that what I was really glad came through was, yes, the family dynamic, but also like the trauma that they're dealing with. I think that's one of the reasons that the comic was so acclaimed, is that it showed how different people process trauma. And it's something like really, really upsetting that they each deal with in different ways. And that is like front and center in the show, and just showing how this is like a damaged family. And it's just this intersection of this like fantasy with real world trauma, and showing how those things come together. Almost reminds me of like in a Pan's Labyrinth-esque way of how, this child was dealt with these like really intense situations by, leaning on like fantasy.
I think that fans of the comics and people new to the show alike are really going to, if you've never seen the book, if you've never read the book, they're going to really get a kick out of like, oh, there are these keys, and oh man, each one has a different power, and what does this one do, and what? So there's this sense of like discovery as you're going along with the characters. And even I haven't read the book in a couple of years, so there were one or two where I was like, oh yeah, like, and it was really fun to kind of like, go back there. And I do think that they nailed it. That was one of the most important things to me, because back in the day you could buy the keys.
And right? The last thing I'll say too, because I know we're a couple weeks out from it still, I will say it's a great binge. If you're intrigued to start, if we've sold you on it, if we're saying we think that it's worth your time, I would say stick it through to the end, because I think the end absolutely pays off. And again, if you're a fan of the comic, I think that they do some stuff that will really, you'll appreciate, is what I'll say, in a way that like maybe you weren't even expecting or anticipating, but that you'll really end up liking.
I feel sufficiently teased because I haven't finished it yet. I guess I got to binge that. Well, thank you both for your thoughts on Locke and Key. If you want some more Netflix, we have a roundup of everything coming to Netflix in January. And if you want to hone in on a particular show we were interested in, it's the Dracula show. We have a full review of that you can watch as well. And be sure to follow and subscribe for more from IGN.